Hello and welcome to the Left Wing Podcast. Will Slattery here with you, and we have plenty to discuss this Tuesday afternoon. The Six Nations schedule has been announced for 2026, and Ireland will be enjoying some Thursday night rugby to start things off, which I think people are interested about but a little apprehensive about as well. So a few talking points have emerged from that schedule release. The Ireland men's sevens team has been wound up. That's caused a lot of controversy in the last couple of days. We'll be getting into that, and also some questions about Leinster's budget and how it compares to some of the other big teams in Europe. So a lot to get to. Also, there was the end of the URC, and we now know the identity of the quarter-finalists and the playoff bracket, so plenty to discuss. Thought I'd be joined in studio by Cian Tracey and on the line by Luke Fitzgerald. Lads, lots to chat about, as I mentioned. Cian, we might just start with the
bumper Champions Cup preview.
The bumper Champions Cup final preview that never was. We actually, if we have like 2 minutes at the end, we'll discuss Northampton. I'm going over. I'm staying in a cottage in Newport that I booked, and a non-refundable cottage in Newport.
You were one of those arrogant Leinster supporters where you have your...
I'm a rugby enthusiast, Cian. I buy my weekend ticket 12 months in advance.
You do, to be fair.
So
you wear a jersey?
No, I would never. No, I would just go. I go as an enthusiast of the game, Cian. That's the capacity I'll be attending.
It's the party line.
And the weather's meant to be shite as well. Now, the roof will be closed, I presume. So that'll be.
I think it'll be a great game.
Well, it should be. So look, if any listeners are going over, feel free to come up to me and we can chat some Champions Cup. But yeah, so we have a couple of minutes at the end. We might squeeze that in. But Cian, we might start a URC end of the regular season last weekend. We now know the quarter-finals. As I said, Leinster played the Scarlets. If they win that, they play Glasgow or the Stormers at home. It could be a rematch of the Glasgow game you attended. I know you weren't too impressed with the fare on offer. The other side of the draw, Munster off to South Africa to play the Sharks. If they win that, potentially the Bulls in South Africa again the week after. So it could be a very tricky path. But they've gone on the road before, as we know, a couple of years ago to win the league. I suppose the Munster Benetton game was the kind of the only one really of interest over the weekend. They got the job done, but we did forecast it might be tricky, and they were 14-10 down at half time. They kicked on. They gave Peter O'Mahony and a few of the other guys to send off they would have liked. Anything kind of jump out to you from it?
It was a bit like the Ulster game the previous week. It was a big second half showing from Munster. I think their bench played a part. Look, Munster have been dogged all season by injuries. Obviously, they've had the coaching upheaval, but they've had so many injuries as well. And I think the last couple of weeks in particular, in the La Rochelle game, obviously showed like the strengths that they do have. Okay, it's not the kind of depth that other teams might have, but they do have a pretty good squad there. And I think we've seen that over the last couple of weeks. And, you know, getting to the URC quarter-final, absolutely brilliant, but that's a bonus on top of qualifying for the Champions Cup next season. Obviously, they both go hand in hand, but it would have been disastrous for Munster. I think for the competition as well, really, you look at the colour that the supporters bring, that Munster bring, the upsets and things like that. I think it would have been a disaster for the tournament as well. They'd never failed to qualify for the Champions Cup, so I don't think anyone in the current squad kind of wanted to have that medal of shame around their necks. It's huge because, look, for lots of different reasons, obviously Clayton Macmillan is coming in. He wouldn't want to be coming into a Challenge Cup campaign.
Yeah, it would have been like when Pat Lam went to Bristol and they'd been relegated by the time he arrived, and he had to start the first season like playing like Rotherham away and stuff.
Yeah, and Munster is still not finished their recruitment either. So I think we've mentioned it before. They're looking to bring in an overseas tight head. So it's easier to sell the Champions Cup dream than the Challenge Cup dream. And then, of course, in December now it's officially confirmed they're going to play a Champions Cup pool game in Porky Queen.
Which I'm going to that. I've already decided.
You've already got your tickets booked, your hotel booked, but that's going to be a big money spinner for Munster as well. So all these things were in the equation, Will, and I thought it wasn't perfect by any means. I still think there's a couple of holes in their defence. What I do like about Munster at the moment, and it kind of follows on from the point that I made about the strength and depth, the sort of the freshness to their back three that they have at the moment. I'm really liking it. Thacker Abrahams has been playing fullback. I think we'll wait and see whether that's his best position. I don't know if he's been tested early. I think, in terms of his, sweeping across the backfield, I think good teams might pick holes in that. But he's played plenty at fullback before he joined Munster as well. But what he gives you at fullback, I think, just opens up so many different options. I think Calvin Nash is playing really good stuff. He's one of Munster's most consistent players. And Diarmuid Kilgallen, who joined from Connacht last year, is one of those guys who was dogged by injuries, but I've been really impressed with him as well. So all of a sudden you have a lot of pace in that Munster back three, which you didn't really have over the last couple of years. So I'm excited to see what they can do. They'll go to Durban, I don't think, with anything to fear on paper. it's an unbelievably strong Sharks team, but they blow so hot and cold. And Munster,
even the game at the weekend, like 12-3 against the Scarlets, like all penalties. It's like the Sharks are such a funny team. Unfortunately for Munster, the only 2 times I could really recall off the top of my head where they've really clicked was in the Champions Cup last 16 a couple of years ago, and the game at the start of this season when they were both times against Munster, and they did look finally like they've come to play with their Galacticos. But I agree with you. I would give Munster a good chance.
Yeah, great chance. And like I said, they'd probably have to go back there again the following week. So look, it's classic Munster. They don't make things easy for themselves. And look, I think it'd be a stretch to suggest they're in bonus territory, but the fact that they've secured Champions Cup rugby for next season means that the pressure is now off to a certain extent, and that could be, I think, a very good thing for them going into it.
Yeah, Luke, I actually give Munster a very good chance against the Sharks. Like we obviously mentioned it there about the Sharks kind of, despite having a really strong team, haven't really kind of delivered a huge amount since they joined the URC. Like they will be favoured to beat Munster at home, but Munster have a bit of a they have a weekend off with the Champions Cup final to travel to South Africa to get acclimatised. I wouldn't be shocked if they turned the Sharks over in 2 weeks.
No, I wouldn't be shocked either, and they've been on the journey before. That always helps. I think they're a team. I think you hear me consistently say this, Will. Like when they've got a full team out, I don't really think they're a team you'd love to be facing. I think they're pretty good. I think they've got good halfback pairing, pretty gritty pack. Their lineout hasn't been functioning, but like generally that has been a pretty strong part of the game, particularly on the defensive end of the ball over the last 10 or 15 years, pretty much ever since Pete O'Mahony's been in the team. He's so good there, so he can really make a mess of it. Tyke Byrne is a turnover machine. Hodnett is too. So's Peter. I like Barron looks okay in there. He looks like a decent addition as well. So I think there's lots to be positive about. I would agree with Cian on the back 3. They look pacey. They look like they can hurt you. I would share his concern around the high ball. I think, no one's really gone after Abrahams all day, but they have gone after him here and there, and you can get paid from him there. The issue is you see the other side of the ball where, you kick loose to him, and that's a huge problem for you too. So, there's a... if you're going to do it, you better do it bloody well, because he's so good on his feet and so quick. So, I think they're in good shape, and I think they've made it difficult for themselves. There's no doubt about that. And South Africa is just, no matter if you've done it before, it's still a very difficult place to go and play. They do play a good bit better at home. I'm interested to watch that one. I wouldn't be. I've nothing definitive. I think the Sharks have proved, as they're kind of up and down. They're not consistent, and I think Munster are generally okay at this time of the year, actually. And as I said, I like the halfback pairings. I think they've got some good kickers there. I think they've got a fairly complete game once their lineout functions. I mean, maybe scrum is can be a little bit creaky, possibly against a South African team, but. No, I think it'll be a really good match. I'm really excited. That's the one I'm most excited about in the weekend. What about you guys?
Yeah, and
I think Michael Milne has made a difference. Sorry, Will, as well. I think it's really smart. Like, I know obviously it kind of dents Leinster's depth chart, but it's great. Like, this is the Irish system, I think, working to its benefit, because obviously Munster's, like I said, their injury situation has improved, but plug in guys like Lee Barron and Michael Milne, who I think will be 2 starters come next season, possibly even in the quarter final that's to come. I think they make a big difference as well. They're 2 big bodies, they're good ball carriers. I've been really impressed with Milne in particular.
Yeah, no, definitely, I agree. It's great to be able to get 2 kind of medical jokers almost in towards the end of the season. And I really think, like, the way the schedule has fallen, like, it takes a lot of the kind of the teeth away from the difficulty of going to South Africa, getting that week off to kind of maybe go over a little earlier and, as I said, get acclimatised. It's not like you have to play and then go straight away. That's where we've seen the real difficulties, and to be fair, for South Africans coming up as well, when they have to go week on week.
The semi-final, if they were to get there, that would be tricky. Whether they'd probably just end up staying over
They'd
there.
stay over there as well. So at least, again, so if it did come to pass, if they did beat the Sharks and had to play the Bulls, at least they'll have been acclimatised. And Munster's record when they've had to play twice in a row in South Africa, other than this year, obviously, which ended Graham Roundtree's tenure, not great, admittedly. But, remember there was 2 years ago they beat the Stormers and drew with the Sharks. Last year they beat the Bulls, and I think did they beat the Lions as well? Yeah, they did. They won the 2 games over there.
A decent record, yeah.
They do. Obviously this year, at the start of the year, infamously, didn't go very well. But of all the teams, they have had by far the most success over there. So that is something to watch. So yeah, they get this weekend off. We had Edinburgh 47, Ulster 17. Very disappointing way for Ulster to end their season. Connacht 22, Zebra 12. Obviously good to finish on a high, but the damage was already done. And Cian, you were at the Aviva Stadium for Leinster 13, Glasgow 5. You call it kind of the deadest of dead rubbers, but you kind of you're a little concerned that Leinster won't have this kind of automatic bounce back and potentially claim the URC. You're still sceptical as to whether they'll end their trophy drought. By the way, a trophy drought which the last time they won a trophy was before the previous Leinster. Which is like, that seems so long ago now, like that South African Leinster. It was a month before the squad was announced in 2021 that Leinster last won a trophy, so it's been a while. Which
is before the big South African teams came into the URC as well. So like it's mad to think Leinster have still never won the URC since they've come in. The jury is out on Leinster, I think, really. Mentally more than anything, Will. Look, I know they pumped Zebra the week before, and like that was just a glorifying training run, really, wasn't it, for them? But I was really not impressed with them at the weekend. I think, look, if you want to take the glass half full approach, sure, they came through a tight affair. Glasgow are the defending champions. I know they've been missing a couple of players this season. They haven't been at their best, but they pushed Leinster all the way. But if we're looking at it just purely through a Leinster focus, I thought their attack was really poor, if I'm being honest. The amount of sloppy passes, the amount of dropped balls from, like, they had a pretty strong team out there. So, look, while they're going into the quarter-final and they should beat the Scarlets, but this is something I was asking kind of Leo Cullen about afterwards. At the time when the Scarlets beat a much-changed Leinster team the week into the Northampton game, I don't think anyone gave that too much credence because it was easy kind of to explain it away. Leinster's focus was on Northampton, but I think in a way the Scarlets showed a template how to beat the Blitz defence. They scored 4 tries against that Leinster team. I was having a look back. I think it was 5 Leinster players featured in the game against Northampton, so it wasn't a complete academy team by any means. The following week they obviously conceded 5 tries to Northampton. Now, on the flip side, their defence was very good at the weekend, and they'll be frustrated with the try that they conceded. But I just thought, in terms of their attack, it wasn't really the sort of convincing performance that you'd be hoping for. I think Sam Prendergast is in a tricky little spot, which is obviously going to happen for a 22-year-old out half. I thought it was a bit telling that he got taken off around the hour mark for Cian Frawley, who looked pretty good actually when he came on, which was positive to see. But a few issues again, like I know Sam Prendergast kicked that beautiful crossfield kick for Jimmy O'Brien. The try got disallowed. It was his pass then that created Jimmy O'Brien's try a few minutes later. But the contact stuff is still a big issue, Will. Not finishing that try in the corner from Adam Hastings' tackle was really poor, I thought. I think you just got to put your head down there and get the ball down. So this is a bit of a challenge for him. I mean, like I said, it's always going to happen for a 22-year-old out half, and he didn't get obviously selected for the Lions tour. So I think there's a little bit of pressure on him now. And like I said, it was good to see Cian Frawley play well, but I think there's a few question marks still hanging over Leinster. And while even like we take it that the Scarlets, played very well against them, we would still expect Leinster to beat the Scarlets. But if they were to play the Bulls, let's say, for example, in a potential final, I would still have concerns if it's a tight game that Leinster will have to get the job done. And we said this in the Champions Cup as well, even before Northampton beat them. Until Leinster get over the line, there will be doubts in my head anyway.
Yeah, I won't be taking any holidays for the remainder of, maybe it's a bit premature with my Italian trip, so I'll make sure that the schedule is clear for the next couple of weeks. Yeah, Luke, where do you kind of assess where Leinster are now, post Northampton? The Zebra game was, they picked their strongest team and, had a record win against Zebra. Glasgow was a much different kind of game. They have the weekend off now, where I'm sure it'll be killing them watching the Champions Cup final, and then they have the Scarlets potentially going into a few more knockout games if they can get a run going. Like, how do you think they've responded to that Northampton game?
I think I know it's going to sound weird having the Zebra game and just kind of discounting, but look, I think it's a little bit flat, right? I think there's a few other bits going on. There's Lion stuff going on in the interim. I think it's, they all went over, did their kind of admin day, I think, during the week. So, I think it's now time to refocus. If you ask me where Leinster are, I think it's desperation stakes. Like, they need to win this competition. They need to win it. I think against the big teams, the issues that have kind of reared their head throughout the year, I'd still have concerns around that. I think the situation around 10, is it's such an important position. You got to be so settled there. That's a big advantage Munster have, is that they're so settled at 10. It's nice to have that just boxed off. You go, if that guy's fit, he's playing. Whereas Leinster at the moment, I think they've picked their guy, but he's got such a big hole in his game that, it sows doubt. I think he looks like a guy who, I think a good preseason would really do him well. Nice little tour with the Irish team. I think a good preseason. He needs to build himself up physically. He needs to go in and do lots of tackle technique, lots of work, and loads of work on the contact side of the game for him. My sense is that he'll get the job done. I think he's got a good head and the shoulders, but he needs to get his head sorted around the defensive stuff, and it's going to be a problem for him because he needs to attack this now. Otherwise, this is going to dog him for the rest of his career, and he's not going to get over it, and it's only going to get worse. And he won't get picked for all the teams that he should get picked based on his ability, his skills, which is the hardest part of the game. So, that's Leinster are in a funny spot. It's desperation stakes, and they need to kind of romp home now all the way to the end. They need to pick their best team. Don't be worrying about resting guys. Don't be worrying about minutes. You don't need to be training guys now. You need to be thinking about the right moves. You need to be thinking about how you're going to break down teams, and you need to go full bore every weekend. This is simple for me with Leinster. They have the best squad in the competition. They don't need to overthink it. They just need to get the job done now. And don't worry about resting guys. Don't be overthinking the selections. Pick the best team you think to win each game. Pick your strongest bench, and go from there. It's a funny position they find themselves in, pretty much having lost, is it 2 games? Is it 2 games since Christmas they've lost? I think it is. And we're talking like proper doomsday, but like it won't be complete doomsday if they win the league. But I think it's really important to go and they do it comprehensively. I'm looking for a convincing finish to the season. I think they're able to do it, but they need to get it out of their own way mentally. That's the biggest hurdle for this team.
Yeah, Cian, because as much as we naturally focus on the Champions Cup, and like last week I was going through various stats about who they played, resting players and whatnot, like it's 7 seasons of the Champions Cup. But in some ways, given the competition and how far we would perceive them to be ahead of the URC pack, 3 seasons without a URC is arguably like a much actually greater underachievement. As much as Europe is the one that everyone focuses on, like I think Johnny Sexton even said in his book, like Leinster, the squad they have, they should be able to win that year in and year out, or certainly get to a final. They haven't even got to a final, or win it 2 out of 3 years. Like to come up short, and a lot of that has been down to teams they've picked rather than like going full bore and being turned over like they have been in Europe. But still, it's very galling that they haven't been able to even win it once.
Yeah, like we probably said the same thing last year, that it'd be inconceivable if Leinster go 3 seasons without a trophy. We're definitely saying it now, that if they go 4...
That'll be a full World Cup cycle, or like a Lions to Lions tour cycle, which would be bananas.
And I suppose what's different about this year is they've no Champions Cup final this week. So they, like Luke said there's no need to be resting players. They're just full bore. They're full bore after this, but... The URC has come on like leaps and bounds. It's not the Pro 14 that Leinster used to win, handy enough, Magners League, whatever it was back then. And they must be so obviously gutted, because look at the amount of work that Leinster have put in over the years. This season, for example, they've won 16 out of 18 games this season in the regular URC season. To think, like, we focus obviously so much on the last kind of couple of months of the season, but the groundwork gets put in back when, people are still kind of waking up to rugby in September, October season, when they're going away to wherever it is, and getting victories with weakened teams. To not then capitalise on that is a massive blow. Obviously, finishing top of the log is pretty important because it gives them home advantage, including the final, which is worth stressing for any listeners who don't know. The URC final isn't a destination final like the Champions Cup. It goes to the highest seeded team. So
if one of our listeners didn't know that, I'd be like, turn off and don't come back.
Yeah, I'm insulting.
Get out.
It is worth repeating though, because it's a massive, to finish top is a massive advantage. Now, I think a little bit of Leinster's aura, maybe for want of a better term, has been dented by Northampton, and we've all seen the video that Northampton gleefully put out behind the scenes in terms of what they thought of Leinster mentally. And I'm sure
we actually never touched on that on the show. That was a very stark video, wasn't it? Yeah. I wonder, it's funny got for, as Luke mentioned, like the Lions meet up and like Henry Paul, like, oh hi Henry, good to see you again.
Yeah, the last time I saw you were on a video slagging us off as being mental.
What did you call us? Yeah.
But it was telling that they put that out because they didn't have to. And I'm sure like lots of teams have said that, but they haven't been able to get the job done. But every team is going to try and play off that kind of mentality as well. And that just gives you a little glimpse to what teams on the outside of the Leinster bubble think. And in fairness to Northampton, they pulled it off brilliantly.
I put some time into looking up these statistics, and I forgot to bring them with me. But since the URC started, so 4 seasons ago, we obviously haven't got the players. I think Leinster have won 10 matches more than any other team, and they haven't obviously won a trophy. So it just shows they've been by far the most consistent, like, regular season team. And you'd assume maybe they might be able to put their best foot forward and win it. But we've thought that other years. This year, as you say, though. Yes, sir.
Well, can I jump in there?
Yeah, go for it.
This is a big thing with Leinster, I think, is that they're underestimating the change that happens with teams towards the end of the season, when it's season on the line, when it's, this could be your season over, you could be getting relegated. All these things kind of harden a team. They toughen you up. And those tries that you're running in, those ones there where you're falling over the line, close to the line, those things don't often happen at the end of the season. It takes maybe 3 or 4 extra phases. Teams are a bit more clued in about how they're breaking you down. They've seen your footage all year. They've seen you in cup campaigns. They've seen, they've seen as much as they can see of you. So they figure out ways to break you down. And they often save, coaches are smart, on other teams. Other players are smart too. They will save up things that they mightn't show you towards the end of the season. I wouldn't be surprised if the Scarlets, have something that they've been holding back, or something that they've been thinking about for Leinster for just this very, very match, to break them down with. Coaches are clued in. I think they're maybe underestimating, the challenge that you come up against, even if you're a better team, and certainly Leinster are a better team and better squad than anyone left in the competition, but they're underestimating how tight the margins really are, even if you are a better squad, just because the mindset switched towards the end of the season. It's like no one wants to go home with this. Once you've come this far, you've put in all the work, as you said, you've done the preseason, you've done all the training. Now you're here. Now it's only one match. Bring your best moves. What's worked for you all season? Well, let's do that. Let's not try anything. People will play a little bit injured. So, sometimes earlier in the season, they might say, well, do you know what? We're not going to risk him. So all those things will happen now at the end of the season. People will get risked because it's only one more game. So all these different factors, if you've got a good kicker, if you've got a good kicking game, if you've got a solid defense, all those things, they make it way harder to beat at this time of the year. So, I just hope they just there's a journey to go on, and you need to realize how much harder it is to do it. And I think you need to be cautious about how you approach these games from a mental standpoint. And that's not giving teams a way in. That's not throwing loose offloads. And Joe Schmidt was a guy who got an awful lot of stick for that. But he was pretty good record when it came to kind of finals and things like that. He was, and this time of the year, he was really good at delivering. And I think it's because he kind of simplified the game. And I do wonder that about Leinster sometimes. Do they simplify, or do they remain complicated? And do they kind of have one speed that they go to? If plan A doesn't work, plan B looks very similar to plan A to me. So that's something for them to think about and mull over, and to try and help them get over the line is some of those kind of key things in big games. And some of those mental challenges that you have coming up to the end of the season.
Yeah, and I really agree with the point you make about maybe underestimating the switch in other teams and how much more clued in they might be, or how much more focused it might be. If you look at the 3 seasons Leinster failed to win the URC, they were home to the Bulls in 2022. They rested Johnny Sexton. They started him on the bench, and they rested Hugo Keenan entirely. By the time Johnny Sexton came onto the bench, Leinster had trailed by double digits, and they couldn't get over the line. The following year, obviously, we know against Munster, they rested 12 players and they lost. Then last year, in the last regular season game away to Ulster, they rested 12 players. And then Ulster produced a really good performance and turned Leinster over, which meant Leinster had to go to the Bulls, where they did pick their full team. But obviously going to Loftus Versfeld is a lot different than hosting the Bulls potentially at the Viva Stadium.
It's such a good point that that Luke makes. And I think in particular, it's the South African teams, Luke, is what I would look at there. Because, look, Leinster make no secret of the fact that they judge themselves off Champions Cups. The South African teams, for whatever reason, haven't bought into it as much. The South African teams want to win the URC, and we see that season after season over the last couple of years, because they time their run to peak at this time of the year and to ensure that they win the URC. They don't really care about the Champions Cup, unfortunately. Hopefully that comes in time, and that's what makes them so dangerous, just to kind of piggyback on the point that Luke was making there.
But they have great, do you know what as well, guys? I think they have great, if you think about South Africa and kind of what generally you see with a South African team, they generally have a great kicker. They generally have some really fast guys on the outside. So if you make a mistake, you get punished. They also have really big physical teams. So generally defensively and at set piece, they're really solid. Do you know what I mean? So they have all the ingredients to be really good at this time of the year. They don't necessarily have to deliver like an unbelievably free-flowing performance. And the Bulls actually did that against Leinster, I thought. I mean, Willie LaRue was picking Leinster apart with crossfield kicks and passes and things. But oftentimes the South African teams don't have to deliver all those things all the time. Like that's something that you have to be really cautious of when you're playing these teams, that you're physically up for it. And I think that's what Munster got right. Munster they played lovely rugby at the end of the season, but they really fronted up against those South African oppositions with to back it up week on week. And I thought they were battle hardened, and they looked like a team that were ready for the challenges. And they kind of, they played some lovely rugby, but they played at the right times, and they simplified things and dug in really, really well at the end of the season. And I think there's some learnings there for this Leinster team, if I'm being honest, about how they went on that journey and how they thought about how they were going to compete against some of these teams that you're going to have to beat, who are really, really good when it comes to a one-off match.
Yeah, and interestingly, like the 3 seasons of the URC has thrown up like a huge amount of surprises. Like obviously some of that, as I mentioned, like Leinster have picked kind of weakened teams, and maybe that's contributed to some of the flux. But at the same time, like 2 years ago, as the Stormers were at home to Munster, they were raging hot favourite. Munster won. Like last year, the Bulls, comprehensively beat Leinster. They were home to Glasgow in the final. You would have assumed they would go on and complete the job. But no, Glasgow went to Loftus Versfeld, a place where a week before we would have thought, geez, no club team is winning there. Look at that. And then Glasgow did what Leinster couldn't the week before and actually came home with the trophy. I think you'd almost forget that, I think. I feel like the season almost ended maybe after the Bulls-Leinster game, and you kind of just almost assumed they went on the win. But no, they didn't. They couldn't get the job done, and Glasgow got a really hard-earned trophy.
The league's been great.
Yeah,
over the last few years.
No, it has.
It's been great.
It's so funny. Like 100%, the product is better. I don't know if it's ever going to be at the stage where we don't have Europe here and the league there. I just don't think.
No, not in Ireland anyway.
But like,
it's history.
Europe is Europe. Like the Champions League is big in soccer too. Like, undisputably, the product is so much better. It's stronger. The South African teams have added a lot. Logistically, there's always going to be issues when you have teams from that many countries. But like, it's even, I think, great. I'd love to know what general people listening think. Like, we have such a good insight then into like when we see the Springboks play. Oh, we've seen these guys before. Like, a lot of guys are now cutting their teeth in the URC, and it gives us such a great like understanding of the global game as well, I think.
Yeah, I don't know. But I know I couldn't agree with you more. I think,
and we've had great finishes, Cian, haven't we? Like, I think if you think about the Crowley drop goal, all these kind of things. Like, I think there's been some brilliant games. Really high. Like, you think Ulster nearly making it. Almost not like the try disallowed at the end. All these kind of things. We've had the moments in this competition too at the end of the season.
And I think it's great for Ireland to swing it back to kind of Irish rugby that the provinces are getting to play against these big South African teams. They're getting to go down and tour South Africa, because a lot of the players before the South African teams would never have played down in South Africa. You've got to deal with the heat, the altitude, the humidity, all these different factors. So you would hope that some of maybe that South African nous in terms of, the club teams, the Springboks, that mentality getting over the line when it matters most kind of rubs off on the Irish teams over the next few weeks anyway.
Yeah, is there a notion that like next year for the first time Leinster will be touring South Africa early in the season? Yeah. And the idea is they might go over with their actual players.
It hasn't been announced yet, but that is my understanding.
This is actually said the fixtures are announced tomorrow, so we're recording Tuesday, so by Wednesday people might know. So that will be massive, I think, I just think it'll be a good experience for those players to have that kind of battle hardened.
Definitely, it changes the complexion completely. And
Loftus Versfeld is one of the matches they'd be playing as well.
And so I didn't.
Incorrect, actually. Sorry.
Fixtures out tomorrow. Yeah, you'll see that the Leinster are going to South Africa much earlier in the season, and it's my understanding it's with the intention to bring a much stronger squad than they have done previously, which is great. Again, it goes back to my point about Irish rugby players getting to go down there and play against these big, outstanding teams.
Yeah,
the only thing I'd worry about is if the Lions, Leinster have decent amount of Lions tours. I wonder when they come back in. I hope it's not too early.
Yeah, I can already see my enthusiasm is already being blunted. It'll be the first 2 weeks of the season. It'll be there. It'll be week 1 and 2, and the guys won't be back until like week 5 or 6. We can see when the fixtures are announced. But yeah, I think the South African teams that are being added as definitely cause. There's always going to be different things with the league and stuff like that, but I think it's done a good job about it at establishing itself. The 2026 Six Nations schedule has been announced, Cian. I mentioned this at the top of the show, and from an Ireland perspective, it's certainly interesting. So, a couple of things to look out for this year, 2026. There's only going to be one break week. So the first 3 fixtures are played in a row, 1 week off, then the final 2 fixtures, that's different from what it used to be, where it was 2 games a week off, 1 game a week off, and then 2 games. Ireland start on a Thursday night against France. So seemingly the Winter Olympics opening ceremony is on the Friday night.
In Milan.
In Milan, so not in France. Yeah. But I think the French broadcaster who has the right to that game also has the rights to the Winter Olympics, and they were reluctant to have it on Friday night. For some reason, they didn't want to have it on Saturday or Sunday either. So it means that we're getting kind of the first ever Six Nations Thursday night rugby game. There's other scheduled stuff such as Ireland.
Is it to give the guys a rest, maybe, Will? I'm thinking if you're going 3 in a row for the first 3 weeks, I wonder, does it give you like a 10-day break and then it's, you know what I mean?
It gives Ireland and France, but not the other teams. The other teams are just playing Saturday, Sunday. So.
Saturday, Sunday.
There's no Sunday game in the opening weekend.
Yeah,
either.
So I think it's just I think the Winter Olympics thing is obviously the main one, and then they're like, will we get a big audience? Like, I think there's a school of thought that they might get a bigger audience on a Thursday night than they would on a Saturday afternoon, just because on Saturday afternoon, people have other things sometimes that come up as well.
They might get a bigger audience, in terms of viewership, but it's an absolute disaster for Irish supporters in 100%. Particular to go on a Thursday. A Friday night game away, which it was last year in Marseille, is hard enough because you got to take work off, whereas now
2 days off work.
That's what I mean. Yeah. So this is not one for the fans at all, particularly away fans. And look at how well Irish supporters travel to the away Six Nations games year on year. So the fans are being massively shortchanged here. And you would hope, look, you'll still imagine a strong group of Irish supporters will go, but not to kind of get too soppy about it, but part of the magic of the Six Nations is the away days and seeing the amount of supporters there. Even like I think back to the final day in Rome just a few months ago, the amount of Irish supporters over there that day, it was like a World Cup. It felt like a World Cup game. So you would hate to see that be removed from the game. And if the Thursday night goes well in terms of viewerships, who's to say, I mean TV, who's to say that next year there won't be a Thursday game as well? And I don't know, they're part of the history and the prestige of the Six Nations. It just doesn't really sit well with me at all. The
last time there was a Thursday game, Ireland won the Grand Slam in 1948. So there is previous and there is history in Irish rugby when it comes to Thursday nights, but it's going back over 70 years.
Yeah, now like rugby players, and obviously Luke knows this much better than I do, are such finely tuned animals in terms of their schedule and stuff. And Friday night games, look, they're well used to them now at this stage. The URC games can be on Friday as well. But a Thursday really throws things off kilter in terms of like your weekly schedule that you're used to.
Yeah, and I just agree with Luke's point about like the Six Nations. Like, does that need... Is this the place to innovate? Like, remember during COVID, I know because there was no fans, they did Monday night rugby. Mm-hmm. Like, I remember Leinster played Glasgow on a Monday night. And I feel like that's the place to innovate. That's the place to try a Thursday or a Monday. Putting France, Ireland, which in the last 3 years has decided the tournament on a Thursday, just seems. And Ireland have generally just gotten shafted, by the way, in all these kickoff times. So their second game is Italy on a Saturday, the early Saturday game. England, Ireland is on the early Saturday slot, which I can't understand that. Like, that's one of the two of the big games. And then Ireland have Wales on a Friday night as well in Dublin, which is going to be the first Six Nations game on a Friday in Dublin, which I'm not a fan of.
It shafts people from all around the country who would hope to get to the game from Limerick, Cork, or wherever it is, Belfast. I mean, we're talking about getting to Paris, which it hasn't been confirmed yet, but that's my understanding that it's going to be on in Paris. Is very difficult, and it's not the same, but like again, you're talking about taking time off work to try and get to Dublin for a game, so it doesn't, apart from supporters in Dublin, it doesn't really play to them in their favour at all. Like, I agree with you, Will. Like, you look to the last game is Ireland-Scotland at 2:10 as well, whereas France and England is at 8:10. So it feels like whoever the tournament organisers doing the fixtures are really shaping this up to be a final shootout between France and England. I think that will give Ireland motivation as well.
Well, like, I don't mind France and England being the last game. Like, that is a blockbuster game. They're two good teams. But
it could be France-Ireland.
Yeah, but just every other game, Ireland game, like putting England Ireland in the kind of the graveyard Saturday shift, like that's I don't know, like that just doesn't sit right with me. Like, Luke, maybe I'm just reading too much into the things and it doesn't really matter, but I don't know. I just feel like Ireland should be getting like more prominent kickoff times.
Well, we only came third last year, so
know your place.
We're back into the patch, with the lads. But yeah, I don't know. It's interesting. Look, you don't want to say, you never want to say like don't touch something, but part of me feels like no, it's just going. So it's going really well. It's really solid. mean, they're charging through the absolute roof for tickets to the games.
Cian, the other big thing from the schedule releases I mentioned is like only one break week this week, or next year, sorry. Which I actually think is a good thing for Ireland. I think Ireland having to go 3 weeks in a row, if you're ever going to win a World Cup, you have to play 3 weeks in a row. You have to have your best team out on the pitch 3 weeks in a row. Up to now, Irish players very rarely have to go 3 weeks in a row in any circumstances. Like we've even seen, as I mentioned, like in knockout runs with Leinster, Leo Cullen hasn't opted to pick guys 3 weeks in a row. But if Ireland ever want to win the ultimate prize, they'll have to do that. And there's a kind of a built-in break the week before the tournament starts where Ireland guys won't be playing. So they'll have to start with 3 weeks. Now, next year is tough. It's France away on a Thursday night, then Italy home, and then England away. And I can already see us talking come round to next year, what team will Ireland pick? Will they actually go 3 weeks in a row? But, I know there's a player welfare element to it. But 3 weeks in a row to me, and then a break before the 3 weeks, that doesn't strike me as something like flogging the guys. Like Ireland players and international players generally outside of France are very well looked after.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more, Will. And I think at times, particularly at World Cups, maybe that's part of the reason why Ireland haven't been able to get up past the glass ceiling of the World Cup quarter-final, that players are almost too managed. And obviously in a Leinster context we can say that as well, particularly around the Northampton game. I also think from a tournament perspective, the second break week really loses a bit of momentum, and particularly for your casual supporters. And obviously the tournament organisers are trying to get more and more supporters on board, as Luke says, at a time when finances are being stretched across the board. So I always felt like, and the player welfare point that you make is absolutely on point, but the second break week you kind of felt like you lost a little bit, and all of a sudden you're picking it back up to go again. So certainly from our point of view, I think this schedule on paper works much more better.
I always thought having a break, one match and another break, I just never thought that made sense. I just thought it should have been two, a break, one. But I just thought, like, I agree, one match in like a 3 or 4 week span in the middle of the Six Nations, I always did. I agree to feel like it kind of lost a little bit of momentum.
And there's no excuse for Ireland not playing their strongest team in those opening 3 games and then see which way the chips fall going into the break week. Absolutely, I couldn't agree with you more.
Luke, obviously you played in the Six Nations. You'd be used to the rhythms of those break weeks, and what do you make of it not being there? Obviously, the reason it's been taken out is to facilitate this new Nations Cup that's going to be played across the summer and the autumn and finish with the kind of a finals weekend at the end of November. That's where they're putting that extra week, as far as I know. So, do you mind there's being one less break week? Do you think the 3 weeks in a row, as I said, might be good for Irish rugby? Where do you fall in all those kind of elements?
Yeah, I think it might be a good thing. I'd agree with the point you made about, maybe Leinster, maybe Ireland, and maybe not being able to kind of deliver historically, particularly Ireland historically, when it comes to having to continue to pick your team for big physical matches. So 3 weeks in a row, which is what they're going to have to do. So see some value in that. As I said, I don't like tinkering too much with the Six Nations, but I could see value definitely in that. And the guys should be able to kind of back it up. Look, you will have 1 or 2 injuries, but I think you'd back the management to kind of use the squad pretty good, and Ireland have a pretty good depth chart, I think. So I see them being able to manage better than most teams, to be honest with you, during that period. And the key thing is probably preparing yourself really, really quickly, and probably actually applying that kind of cup mentality to the start of the competition that I was talking about for Leinster. Whether that's simplifying things a bit quicker. But I think picking your team is really strong from the start, like no messing around. In fairness, Andy Farrell does that. I don't think he does too much messing around with his selections. So I'm interested how it pans out. We'll all be glued. I think everyone else will still be glued. I don't think we lose any of that. And I'd probably, the one thing I would say that I really agree was Cian's point around maybe the second break week. It was always kind of nice as a player, but I always felt like did you lose a little bit of momentum in the public sphere with that second week, particularly if it's a game that doesn't really count for something. Mm-hmm. That's when you really have a real fall off in kind of interest levels. Was kind of my experience, or certainly the buzz you felt around the game. You can always feel that. You can kind of feel a bit of a buzz, and if you're in town, if it's a home game, but even if you're abroad, do you lose a little bit of that? So yeah, maybe I could see a little bit of value in it, and it doesn't feel like it's a massive kind of move away from what the competition has been. It feels like a nice change. Maybe the Thursday one, I agree, maybe not so much, but the rest of it, I think, yeah, maybe not so bad. Let's have a look and see. That it doesn't feel like a massive departure.
Yeah, look, and I'm willing to, like, if this time, in February 2026, if France-Ireland is unbelievable and we find that it was great and it did add a new buzz or a new energy, potentially I might feel differently. But I do like to go to a lot of those away matches just as in a personal capacity, not working. And it's brilliant. So, like, diluting that. And I feel
you're the voice of genuine. I mean, it's genuine. You're the voice of so many supporters there, because it's not easy to get that.
No,
time off work.
it's not like, and I feel like Ireland are almost being used. Sure, lad, they'll go anyway. Like I don't like the fact that they're probably banking on Irish fans loving the away trip so much, which they do, that they'll probably still take 2 days off and go, which they probably will. But it's still,
I don't think you'll have as many numbers, because I think you'll have a fair chunk who will just find it too.
And Paris, it's
when you go for a pub, go to a good atmosphere in an Irish pub to watch the game. Like not knocking, would never ever hear me knocking Paris. Like, what a city, but. Thursday night could be great crack at home here, so maybe you're right. Maybe the TV numbers are through the roof, like I could definitely see, a couple of lads heading for, a couple of pints after work. I mean, that'd be great crack, in fairness, wouldn't it?
And the TV is where the Wonga is at. And like I said, if that goes well, then I think we'll see another Thursday game next year.
Yeah, we'll certainly be one to kind of keep an eye on when it comes around in a few months' time. Or maybe next year, longer than a few months. Okay, let's finish up with the Sevens situation, Cian. The men's team has been wound up. Statement released last week, kind of citing financial elements to the decision, but then also that the union's assessment concluded that the men's seven programme does not contribute as a development pathway for the 15s game, with current academy structures in place within the provinces offering greater development opportunities for men's rugby. There's been a big backlash to that. Like, a lot of current former players have come out, like Terry Kennedy, Harry McNulty, Billy Dart has spoke strongly about it. I know you had a piece in the Sunday Inn now that, like, the parents of some of the players had weighed in, which had a very distinctly Russell Kelly feel to it, I'm not going to lie, but that was kind of funny. But yeah, like, it's interesting how much debate and reaction it sparked. Like, what's your overall view, like, on whether... It's like obviously no one's going to come out and say it's the right thing to do, but if the IRFU are claiming that there's some big financial reason for this, and that at the same time it's not contributing massively to the 15s game, we discussed off air, like, is that what the sevens team was for the whole time? Was it merely to produce guys for 15s? Because that's kind of a hard ask for the sevens programme to do. If it was to kind of grow rugby and maybe every 4 years take a slice out of Olympic kind of audiences and promote it that way, that seems to be potentially a worthwhile endeavour to keep. But I can see there's loads of different elements too. What's your kind of overall view of what's happening?
Can I just touch on the letter first of all, because there's been a big backlash to the letter as well. Obviously, it was a 5-page letter that...
Get my Mont Blanc, that's what it's reminding me of.
Look, these kind of reactions were inevitable, but I think it's important to give a bit of context that I'm not sure all of the players were totally enamoured about that letter in the first place, and certainly not it leaking out to us when we ran the story, obviously, at the weekend. So I think it's important to stress that the players didn't go to Mammy and Daddy and say, oh, would you mind writing a letter to our bosses in the IRFU to try and get our jobs back. That's not what happened here. So give them a bit of credit. I think, and to give the parents' side, they're the ones who've travelled around the world, and they want to see, I think, obviously it's not really about their sons, because it was mostly the parents of former players. They want to see players coming through now getting the same opportunities that their sons got. And okay, maybe the letter wasn't the most ideal way to go about it, but the sentiment is there, and I think on a human level you can absolutely understand it. So it's desperately sad, Will, I suppose, is my overriding feeling, because we're talking about players losing their jobs here come August. I think the latest is that their contracts are going to be paid until the end of the year. Now, the big thing about the Sevens was their contracts aren't worth much anyway. So the amount, you mentioned a couple of the guys there, Terry Kennedy, Billy Dardis, Harry McNulty, Jordan Conroy, all these guys, the amount of work that they put in.
What were they worth? It was like
18 to 30 grand. They were capped at 30 grand, but the 30 grand only came in kind of the last couple of years. Most of those lads at the start were on about 18, 20 grand, which, considering they had to live in London because they were in Dublin because they were based up here, that is extremely tough. And they're away from the limelight, but the amount of work that they were putting in behind the scenes to get to the Tokyo Olympics, to get to the Paris Olympics as well. They had a former World Player of the Year, was it in 22, in Terry Kennedy. Ireland finished second on the World Series last year going into the Olympics. So Ireland had established themselves as a force on this stage, and it was, I know a lot of people jumped on the bandwagon, as we all do for other sports in the Olympics, I might add, but the Olympics was class. I know it didn't go according to plan for Ireland, but it was so cool to see.
They were close to winning a medal.
They were, yeah, but they were really disappointed. They went there with like massive ambitions of winning a medal. And how cool was it to see an Irish team competing in rugby on that stage? I know we saw it in Tokyo, which was obviously very different in terms of like no supporters and that. So that opportunity is being taken away now from players who, look, granted, guys in this country who hope to play rugby don't necessarily grow up wishing to become Olympians, but that's become a reality now since it's become an Olympic sport. So it's really disappointing. The parents have obviously called, and they're not the only ones, for the review to kind of become public into how much was done to save the programme, because I think from the perception from the outside looking in is that once David Nucifora finished up, that the IRFU were, you know, hoping to wind this up because they want to save money to put towards the 15s game. And putting on, seeing it from that point of view, I can understand it, because ultimately the men's 15 team, we've just spoken about the Six Nations, is the lifeblood of rugby in this season. The IRFU have obviously posted last year a deficit of 18 million, but the argument is how much was the Sevens programme actually costing to run. The other point to mention is Ireland got shafted this year by World Rugby, and World, in terms of changing the format of the Sevens schedule, which meant that Ireland got relegated halfway through the season. And as one of the former players said to me last week, it's like the Champions Cup changing schedule mid-tournament, or the Champions League in football.
I could see that actually happening.
You know, it's crazy. So from talking to people on the ground, Will, there's a massive not expectation but belief that Ireland are just the first to fall here, that Sevens is in big trouble financially. We've just spoken about the Six Nations, and in terms of the money being in TV, the Sevens isn't on TV anymore, so there's no money in it. Most unions are losing money from that. So it's Sevens and a global series find itself in a very tricky situation. And like I said, talking to a couple of people, they believe that Ireland are just going to be the first nation to pull their Sevens programme back because other nations didn't want to be seen to be the first ones to do it. So if that's the case, I think it'd be really sad, because you're taking another avenue for young guys to play rugby. You know what I mean? I know Sevens isn't the biggest thing in this country, but it's still a way to keep players involved in the game and to potentially play the Olympics, and that is really sad.
Yeah, like just in terms of players in squads this year who played Sevens rugby, like Leinster had 4: Jimmy O'Brien, Hugo Keenan, Liam Turner, Will Connors. Munster had 2: Andrew Smith and Shane Daly. Connacht had 1, and Che Mullins. And Ulster had 4 in Izashukwu, Balakoon, Zach Gordon, Nick Timoney. So some of those guys played more than others, obviously. Like some of them you might associate, you know, who kind of got a bit of a start there. Maybe someone like Balakoon or Izashukwu. Others probably played there, you know, very, very young when they were already in academy. So like
Zach Ward is a good example.
Yeah, Zach Ward is undisputedly someone who came through Sevens. Like Izashukwu, I think, kind of got a start there as well. Some of the other guys, though, were definitely kind of on track to be playing for Leinster or Munster or what have you without that, I would say. Luke, what's your kind of view on it? Like, I know, to be fair, we were kind of critical of it. You know, Hugo Keenan going to play there and missing the end of last season, but it's still not nice to see the team being wound up, because they have had some success. Where they fit in the overall, I suppose, structure of Irish rugby, I guess, is kind of where I land on it, because, as I said, the statement refers to the kind of the 15s element of it, and I wasn't aware that was the kind of express purpose of the team, to kind of get guys for the 15s team. Maybe everything in the country ought to be, in terms of if that's the big cash cow, but I don't know. People seem to be coming at it from different vantage points. Like the guys involved seem to, you know, come at it from the Olympic vantage point, and maybe the IRFU are looking at it solely through the prism of the 15s, and maybe the finances obviously too.
Yeah, well, I suppose I've always looked at it through that prism. So rightly or wrongly, that's been my view, is that I think that's kind of a completely different game, to be honest with you. And I don't really think it's a really great pathway for a 15s player. I think it's very, very different to the 15s game. I will say I'm really gutted for guys that it's kind of ended this way. I'm not sure it was like unbelievably well communicated, which is always a little bit disappointing, I think. And there's a huge amount of effort that goes in. Like, regardless of what I think about sevens rugby. Like I'm not a big supporter. Like as in, I wouldn't be watching the sevens games if I'm being completely honest. I don't really have any interest in it, but it's I'm really disappointed for them. They've like the training for that. Like you have to be so fit and so strong, and all the skills work, all that kind of stuff. The guys are for not like a massive amount to pay. Really, like those numbers you said, the salary numbers are not the. I would say they look at that and they go, well, we can redeploy that to the 15s game. So if you're on a 30 grand salary, that's 2 development contracts that we can put out. So I would say that they're thinking that's how the IRFU are thinking. But I also would say the big cost center here is probably around, like the team and traveling with the team. Like, so, it's plane tickets, it's hotels, it's all those kind of things. I would say that's probably where the bigger savings are on this. But, yeah, I don't know. It's probably suffered a little bit because, Ulster, Munster and Connacht are probably under a little bit of pressure financially. And I think they're realizing that this is a nice way to maybe supplement some of those teams that are under pressure. And really, like the men's 15s game is what keeps rugby alive in Ireland financially, So if you're not helping the Irish team to get better by supplying players that are specifically training for the game that keeps it alive, well, how much value are you adding? And that's the cold way to look at this. And I think it's the way that the IRFU have looked at this. So, doesn't mean it's not incredibly disappointing or sad for the guys who put in a huge effort. And I do hope that there's, I don't know, is there an alternative funding source or is there a way they could save the program? It looks like, that's probably beyond them at this point, but maybe some kind of benefactor might say, you know what, I think those guys are putting in some really hard work. It was great to see them on the international stage at the Olympics. They made the country very, very proud.
Yes, people have been so worked up about it, but I would question, and I'm probably going offline, like how many of those people actually follow sevens when it's, going around. And that's part of the problem because it's very difficult to watch. You need to get like the time zone differences are crazy in terms of where they play, which doesn't lend itself to being viewer friendly. It's not on TV. Like I said, it's also the timing of it, Will and Luke, that those guys who are contracted by the sevens are now going to the market trying to find potentially another club, whether it's in England, France. I did an interview with Adam McBurney at the weekend who's playing in Romania. Guys now have to try and think outside the box to try and save their careers, but going to the market now, Luke, is just an absolute disaster when most teams have already sorted their squads for next season. So I can totally understand their anger. They had a meeting on Monday with the IRFU, with David Humphreys, performance director, and I don't believe much came of that in terms of the hopes of saving it, but I think they got their pound of flesh. But that's probably all that the players were going to get out of it, because it seems like the IRFU have obviously crunched the numbers and made their decision, which is really disappointing, because I think the harsh reality of it now for, I would say, the majority of those guys is they're probably not going to pick up contracts now. So all of a sudden you're potentially losing guys to the sport, which is just a disaster, really, because, like I said, sevens gave a different avenue to keep guys playing rugby, which is ultimately what you want, I think, in this country.
Yeah, well, hopefully some of those guys can end up with contracts elsewhere. As you say, awful timing for that, with a lot of guys already signed up for next year and clubs probably done a lot of their business, but hopefully there's a resolution for some of them, because, as you say, you don't want to see that many players lost to the game, especially after what they've achieved in terms of giving good showing at the Olympics recently and qualifying in 2020 as well. That's all we have time for. I'd like to thank Cian and Luke for joining me on this week's episode of the Left Wing Podcast. We'll be back next week with a bumper Champions Cup review that may or may not feature much Champions Cup final talk, depending on how that game goes and whatever talking points pop up between now and then. So until next time, thanks so much for listening and goodbye.